Hey friends, welcome to Doll Art House. Today I'm going to be turning Spectra Von Geist into Avatar Kyoshi from Avatar the Last Airbender. First up, I boil the head for about 30 seconds, which makes it easier to get the head off the body without breaking anything. Once the head is free, I cut off all the hair as close to the scalp as possible. The hair is glued to the inside of the head, so once you've cut the hair off from the outside, you gotta scrape out the little bits on the inside. Next up, we get to take off her face. This is definitely one of my favorite parts of the process. Once the head is clean, I put on a coat of Mr. Super Clear, and then we can get started painting. I like to work slowly, kind of building up coats of color. Different pastels that are similar in shade, or like I'll take a couple of different colors of pastels and blend them together. And over time, the color starts to build up. And pretty much when it stops building up, that's when you know it's time for another coat of Mr. Super Clear. Once I've got some preliminary shadows laid down, I like to start by drawing the eyes. Sorry about my hair, by the way. I've tried to cut around it, but this is my first time with this particular setup, and I didn't realize I was getting in the shot. So once I've got my eyes laid out, it's time to start the iconic Kyoshi makeup. I'm drawing her makeup on with watercolor pencils, and I know it might look a little faint right now, but as it builds up over time and, multiple coats of Mr. Super Clear and coming back and hitting it with the pencil again and again, by the end it's a nice solid black. So don't be deceived by this first pass. So when I first started painting this doll, I thought I might be able to put the red part of her makeup on with chalk pastels, but it ended up not being as rich in color as I wanted. I probably could have built it up over time, but I felt like I got, as you're going to see in a minute, I got a better, richer color with the watercolor pencils. I spent a lot of time trying to get her face paint symmetrical. And one of the tricks that I use when I'm trying to match something from one to the other is I turn it upside down, and that way it's easier for me to see the lines and not get caught up in the features. So I turn it upside down, it's easier to see if I'm matching the curves. I make a lot of mistakes, so erase and continue forward. So right around here, I get the curve that I want, and it's starting to look nice and symmetrical. I love erasers. So this is where I decide to try the red watercolor pencil. And right off the bat, I get a much richer red. It's funny with this doll, you really want those distinct bands of red and black. And most of the time when I'm painting a doll, it's all about blending, blending, blending. But with Kyoshi, her makeup is dramatic because it's got those really distinct lines. I always feel like when I put the pupils in the dolls, that's when I can start to see the personality coming out. This is another place where I would normally use the pastels to blush the lips. But again, with Kyoshi, her makeup is so dramatic that I found the watercolor pencils did a really good job just outlining those lips really crisply. One of the things that I try to spend a lot of time getting right is the lower lash line of the dolls. I'm trying to create a convincing three-dimensional illusion. Kyoshi has green eyes, so I try to give them some dimension by mixing in a bunch of different shades of green. Eyelashes tend to shade the top part of the iris, so I put the darker colors up there to sort of mimic a shadow. And then I put the lighter colors at the base of the iris to give the eye the suggestion of a glow. So as I'm building up color on the eyes and on the lips, I am taking breaks periodically to give it another coat of Mr. Super Clear. And that does a couple of different things. Number one, it protects what you've already done. Number two, it gives the surface of the doll more of a toothy quality, like drawing against paper instead of a magazine page. And as you draw over the different coats, your color builds up and just becomes really rich and powerful. So this is my last blushing pass, and I like to add a little bit of color underneath the eyes, after I've finished everything else. And once that cheek color is there, I draw on the lower lash line with my watercolor pencils. And I was giving the lips here a little bit more dimension using a darker color. Okay, final touches to the eyes, and then it's time to put the highlights on. I use white acrylic paint for the highlights. And this is something that, just try to keep your hands steady. And hopefully you put the dots where you want them. I like to hit the side of the pupil and then the corners of the eyes, anywhere where moisture might gather. All right, that's it for the face. Now let's get started on the body. So Spectra has some interesting features. She has a plastic molded bracelet that's attached to her hand. It's not separate. So the first thing I'm gonna do is carve off these accessories. After I carve off what I can with the X-Acto knife, I file off the rest with a little file. These are little tiny hands, but I spent a lot of time working on them. But I think it was effort well spent. By the time I was finished, they looked like nice little hands. So once I finished with the hands, it was time to clean the body. And for this, I use a non-acetone based nail polish remover. So the other thing you may have noticed about Spectra is that her hands and the bottoms of her legs are transparent. And since Kyoshi is not transparent, we have to fix that. So here I'm covering her legs and arms and hands with a couple of coats of white acrylic paint. This is going to serve as a base for the body blushing, which we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay, so the truth is we're actually not going to see very much of Kyoshi's skin at all. Her costume actually ends up covering most of her body. So this is kind of just because. Anyway, I guess it makes me feel better knowing she has some skin tone under all that clothing. So just like before, I'll do a coat of pastels and then I'll spray it with a coat of Mr. Super Clear and back and forth and back and forth. And over time it builds up until it has a nice kind of dimensional look to the body. And yep, belly button. Next up, we have to do something about Kyoshi's hair. I'm actually gonna make a wig for her out of some black yarn that I had lying around. Normally I would go to the store and find a yarn that had a really nice feel to it, but it's COVID, so here we are. This is actually my first time using this technique. Most of the time I make wefts and then I just glue them on like as sort of a string, but with this doll I wanted to try something a little bit new, so I'm gluing the hair directly to this plastic wrap that's around the doll's head, and I'm gluing it on with Mod Podge. So it's basically creating a shaped wig right on the doll's head, and it gives me a little bit more control as to where I place each individual strand of the hair. And I think I'm definitely going to try this again. I'm actually kind of excited to try it on a doll with a little bit more of a wild hairstyle. Kyoshi is pretty straightforward. She keeps her hair tied back and she's got that big headdress. So once the hair dried, I pulled it off the plastic wrap and it made a nice little wig cap. Then it was just a matter of making sure the placement was right, and then gluing it on. Again, Kyoshi's hair is pretty straightforward. The only trick here is just finding approximately the right position for where her hair is tied. Then it's just a matter of trimming up the ends, and I try to feather it out a little bit to kind of take some of the volume out of that last little ponytail part. Then I sew on her hair tie, and we're basically done with Kyoshi's head. Okay, now we will tackle Kyoshi's costume. Now I wanted to try something a little different than going with the colors that just come straight off the animated show. I wanted to try some textures and some interesting sort of interpretation of Kyoshi's costume. So the colors aren't going to be exactly what Kyoshi wears on the show, but I think it's gonna look nice. It's definitely gonna be interesting. First up, I'm gonna start with Kyoshi's tunic. Now I should probably admit here that I've actually never made doll clothes before, so my first piece of advice would be don't use a very thick piece of material for a tiny little doll tunic. In my defense, I thought it would be cool to have sort of like a, like a padded tunic. She's a fighter, she needs some protection. One thing I learned making my first complete doll outfit is that it takes a lot longer to sew a doll outfit than it does to paint a doll's face. You can probably see here how bulky it is with all the seams, but it fits pretty well. The really challenging part comes next. So if you're familiar with Kyoshi's outfit, you know that her tunic has a sort of a border around each one of the 4 tabs on the base of the tunic. And I wanted to sew those on rather than painting them on because I thought it would feel more authentic. And this was the single biggest time suck of this entire project. Oh my gosh, you guys, I think I sewed that border on for 4 hours. The hardest part was getting the corners to turn. They're just so small. I actually debated how long I should let this part of the video run because it seems like it's just so repetitive, but I'm trying to faithfully record the whole process, so let's just sit here and enjoy some nice music for a minute. And I bet you think we're done. Nope. Okay. Oh wait, nope, we're not done. Kyoshi has these little square details on the top of her tunic, and at first I thought I could glue them on, but that did not work. Then I thought, okay, I'll sew them on. But that did not work either. So what I ended up doing that did work was taking strips of cloth, sewing them together almost like a quilt, and then hemming those into the little squares for the top of the tunic. Then I had to rip open the seam I had just sewn so that I could tuck the edge of the square into the border. Okay, tunic is done, now it's time to start on the shirt. So I start by copying the pattern I used for the tunic and then adding a little bit to the front of it because the shirt is the same shape as the tunic, it just comes up a little bit higher. So just like the tunic, the shirt also has a border of a darker gold color. I start by cutting out the pieces for the shirt from this shimmery gold material that started life as my curtains. I use the pattern as a guide to create the pattern for the border piece that's going to go up around the collar. Once I've got that, I cut out 2 pieces for the border, and then I hand sew them to the shirt. So it's a little funny with this. You have to sew the curves together so that they will lay flat when you open the shirt out. It also helps to iron everything. So once I've attached the border to both pieces of the shirt, I sew it together and then I fit it on the doll. The difference between the shirt and the tunic is that the shirt has sleeves. So once I get all my measurements, I cut out a sleeve pattern and then I start to sew that onto the shirt by hand as well. The trickiest part of this was actually turning the sleeves inside out once they'd been sewn. Now it's time to test the fit. On to the skirt. And this is the outer skirt. Once I've got the costume assembled, I take a look and see what am I missing. Mostly the accessories, the belt, the boots, the bracers, and the headdress. The belt is pretty straightforward. The bracers gave me a little bit of trouble. Initially, I thought I could get away with using glue, and then I realized, no, let's just take what we learned from the shoulder squares and sew it. So once they were assembled, I sewed them onto the doll's arm over the shirt. Someday I want to learn how to make doll shoes, but that day is not today. Instead, I'm just taking a pair of boots that I had and painting them sort of a greenish-blackish color for Kyoshi's boots. I try them on and I think they look pretty good with the outfit. The last piece of the puzzle is Kyoshi's headdress. For this, I'm just freehanding a pattern based on the reference image that I've got. So I've decided to use cardstock for this because it's stiff enough that it'll stand up on its own, and I can cover it with material for that sort of decorative fan pattern that the front of her headdress has. So for the fan part of her headdress, I'm using the same material that I used to make her shirt. After some trial and error, I found the easiest way to do this was to make a pleat, iron it down, and then check and see where the next pleat should go, and then iron that down. And once I had all of the pleats ironed, I was able to glue it to the cardstock. Once I had the first half done, I just mirrored it on the other side. Then I needed to make a back for the headdress to hide the cut ends. I'm using cardstock for this as well, but I make it a little bit smaller so that it won't show when you're looking at the front of the headdress. For this one, it's just flat material, it doesn't have any pleats. And once that's done, I just glue the back to the front and press it together. The front of Kyoshi's headdress has two little squares that are sort of nested inside of each other. So for the big square, I use that same sort of pale gold cloth. And then for the smaller square on the inside, I use the darker gold that I use for the collar of her shirt. Here you can see how the fan part of her headdress looks. So that fan part actually sits on top of another base. And I'm going to make this out of the darker gold fabric, and that is attached to the green ribbon that wraps around her head. I'm using cardstock for the interior of this one more time. This part of the headdress actually only connects to the very front part of the fan, kind of where the squares are, and the rest of it wraps around Kyoshi's head. Then I attach the green ribbon and the headdress is done. The only thing Kyoshi is missing now are her eyelashes. And she's done. Now I get to put all the elements together and we can see how Kyoshi's turned out. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please help support my art here on YouTube by liking and subscribing. I'll see you in the next video, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe this summer.